Welcome to month 4 of our Block of the Month 2022. You can find the pattern on our Facebook page, The Quilted Forest Friends, where there's a PDF that you can print from home, or you can take screenshots and print it from home, or you can push pause and write down the information that you need to make the block. This month's block uses 4 fabrics: a background, a medium, a dark, and an accent fabric. It's time to cut. From the background fabric, you need to cut one strip that is 3.5 inches by the width of fabric. You also need to cut a strip that is 4 inches by the width of fabric. From the 3.5 inch strip, you need to cut 4 squares that are 3.5 by 3.5 and one rectangle that is 3.5 by 16 inches. From the 4 inch strip, you need to cut 4 squares that are 4 inches by 4 inches. From the medium fabric, you need to cut one strip that is 3.5 inches by the width of fabric. From that strip, you will cut one rectangle that is 3.5 inches by 16 inches. From the dark fabric, you need to cut one strip that is 4 inches by the width of fabric. Then you will cut 2 squares that are 4 inches by 4 inches, and then you will cut the strip down to 3.5 inches wide so that you can cut 4 rectangles that are 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches and one square that is 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. From the accent fabric, you need to cut 2 squares that are 4 inches by 4 inches. I am making 3 colorways for my blocks each month, so I'm also going to take the time right now to cut out the pieces for my red, white, and blue version and my version that has the black background and bright colors. Now that everything's cut, it's time to sew. Make sure you're piecing with 1/4 inch seam allowances. Piece the medium 3.5 inch by 16 inch strip to the 3.5 inch by 16 inch strip of the background fabric and press towards the medium fabric. When pressing pieces like this, I generally like to press it flat first and then press it towards whatever seam I'm pressing it towards. I think my seam lays a lot flatter and doesn't bubble or wrinkle. From this piece, you are going to cut sections that are 3.5 inches wide and will measure 3.5 inches by 6.5 inches. I'm also making progress on my other 2 colorways. Now is the time to draw a line corner to corner on the wrong side of all the background squares, both the 3.5 and the 4 inch. If you don't want to draw lines, you can just use the diagonal seam tape instead, like I'm using here. For this part, you want to place your 4 inch accent squares onto your background squares right sides together, and then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch away from the corner to corner line on each side. The great thing about using the diagonal seam tape is that I don't have to draw the lines, and all I have to do is follow the corner of my piece with a black line so that I'm getting my lines on either side of a center line. I'm also going to do the same with my 4 inch dark squares and the 4 inch remaining background squares. Right sides together, you're going to sew a 1/4 inch away from the center line on each side. Once you're done sewing, it's time to cut them apart. You're just going to cut between the 2 sewn lines. It might be tempting to do this cut without the ruler, but I have found that if I don't use the ruler, my cuts are uneven and the seams aren't exactly right. So always use a ruler to do this part, and it's safer too. Seams on bias edges are easy to distort, so please press carefully. For the pieces with the accent fabric, you are going to press toward the accent fabric. For the pieces that have the dark fabric, you are going to press toward the background fabric. Now it's time to trim all these squares to 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. You can use any ruler for this, any kind of square ruler, but what I find helpful is using the block lock ruler because it has that little channel on the back that sits in the seam and makes it really easy to get these squares perfect. Now it's time to sew these units together. Because of the way you press them, these seams will nest together, be very easy to sew. You want to make sure you have the one with the accent fabric on the right and the dark fabric on the left, and you're going to sew them into an arrow shape. Once they're sewn together, it's time to press them. You can press them in either direction because these seams don't match up with anything else in the block. It doesn't matter which way you press them, so do which way you like. And I'm still working on my alternate colorways, the red, white, and blue version and the black background with the bright colors. Now it's time to place a background 3.5 inch square on one end of the dark 3.5 inch by 6.5 inch rectangle, right sides together, and you're going to sew on the line this time. You're sewing from corner to corner. You're going to sew from the upper left to the lower right of the square. Instead of cutting at a 1/4 inch seam allowance and just throwing away those extra triangles on this piece, I will usually sew a seam about 1/2 inch away from the first seam closer to the corner and then cut between them so that I have a spare half square triangle unit to use on another project. Double check that you have sewn the seam the correct way before you cut these units apart. Cut between the lines with a ruler so that you have your 4 block units and 4 bonus squares. You will want to press towards the corner for these units or toward the background fabric. You can also take a little bit of time right now to press those 4 extra bonus squares. I'm also going to take the time to trim my bonus squares down to 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches, and you can trim those other rectangles as needed to measure 3.5 by 6.5. Now it's time to sew these units together to get the corner blocks. If you've pressed correctly, these seams here in the corner should nest. You're going to want to press away from the rectangle piece and toward the piece that has the accent fabric. This square should measure 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. Now it's time to make the rows. You are going to make 2 of the rows that have the corner units and 1 of the center row. You want to press the rows with the corner pieces to the center. Piece the dark square between the 2 remaining pieces from the very first step, and that is your middle row. For this row, you will press away from the center. All that's left is to sew the 3 rows together into your block. With any luck, all these seams should nest together and be really easy to sew. Now it's one last trip to the ironing board to get this block nice and flat. You are going to want to press toward the center row, and I did use a little bit of Mary Ellen's Best Press spray so that my block wouldn't lay nice and flat. I usually will press my blocks from the back side first just to make sure all my seams are going the correct way and I'm not undoing something I had ironed earlier, and then I will turn it over and press it from the front just to make sure it looks perfect. And here are my finished blocks. This is the one for the batik version, and then I have my red, white, and blue, and then I have my dark background with the bright fabrics. I hope you enjoy making block 4 of our block of the month, and come back next month for block 5. Hit that like button, make a comment, share with your quilting friends, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and happy quilting!